think of ourselves as the most powerful beings in the universe, it's unsettling to discover that we're wrong. Time has come to see the world as it is.
Can we pull back the veil of static and reach into the source of all being? Behind this curtain lies this random pattern generator. You will be responsible for an escalation that will destroy everything.
In this episode, I'll be reading from the collection of reports and notes I've made over the years about my experiences with spirits and subsequent research into the occult. Now, since I wrote most of these notes years ago, there may be a little overlap with some of the things I've already mentioned on earlier episodes of the podcast. The titles of the two entries I will read on this episode are, first, An Introduction to Their World, or The First Evidence to Myself That I'm Not Completely Insane, and then Their World, or Extra-Dimensional Space via a Psychology Programmed by Modern Western Culture. But first, the news.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
A pilot of the British Royal Air Force, Wilbur Wright, described an experience, quote, "In early 1941, I was stationed at RAF Hemswell, Lincoln, as a ground engineer. I returned from leave by bus late one Sunday evening, completely out of cigarettes, and all the canteens were closed. But I remember I had some cigarettes in the hangar, and walked down in the blackout, entering the hangar through the central steel doors at the front. The aircrew room was on the right, where flying personnel of 61st Bomber Squadron kept their flying clothing. I heard a noise from the crew room, and opened the door to investigate it. It was in total darkness, and I switched on the light. The blackout curtains were in position, and I saw a figure in uniform groping in one of the lockers. He was wearing a flying helmet, a leather fur-lined jacket, black knee-length flying boots, and I recognized him as leading aircraftsman Stoker, a mid-upper gunner on the Hampton bomber, who had to fly with the hood open to look for attacking fighters. This was before all aircrew had sergeant rank to gain improved treatment for POWs. I said, 'Hey, Stoke, what are you doing?' He replied irritably, 'I can't find my bloody gloves.' 'Well, that's your problem,' I said. 'Put out the lights when you go.' He made no reply to that, and I entered the hangar, found my cigarettes, and went back to my billet. Next morning I went to breakfast, and as always happened, I asked the man next to me what had been happening during my week's absence. 'Very dodgy 2 nights ago,' he said. 'They went mine-laying in the Dortmund-Ems Canal, and we lost McIntyre and his crew. Hit at low level by flak, rolled and went straight in. The mine went off, they had no chance.' 'My God,' I said, 'that chap Stoker had a lucky escape then.' 'Stoker? Oh, he went in with the rest. There was trouble before they took off. He couldn't find his flying gloves, and he could have frozen to death with the rear gun hatch open. He was moaning all the way out to the transport. I said nothing, but this preyed on my mind. And 2 days later I reported sick, told the MO what had happened. He said he believed me, but he gave me some pills to make me sleep. And as time went on, the shake stopped and I forgot about it. Looking back, the most remarkable aspect was that the air gunner looked perfectly normal to me. His clothing creaked as usual when he moved, his face was worried but in no way remarkable, and it was only later that I realized he had been groping around in his flying clothing locker in pitch darkness. I took the advice of the medical officer on the station and told the story to nobody else. He asked me to write an account of it in longhand, which I did on the back of a sheet of station routine orders, and gave it to him. Ever since I have wondered how many of these things we see in broad daylight, regarding them as normal living human beings. As I see it, there's no way to distinguish them from a living, breathing person. In the early 1950s, New Zealander John Stewart became obsessed with the UFO phenomenon and was assisted in his research by a young lady he calls Barbara. After making some close UFO sightings in 1954 and receiving anonymous threatening phone calls ordering them to discontinue the UFO studies, Barbara claimed that she returned home one night to find a foul odor in her apartment. Then she was brutally attacked by a creature she could not see. She said that it had a skin the texture of sandpaper. It raped her and left her body covered with small scratches. Later, both Stewart and the girl saw a weird, loathsome monster with spindly limbs and covered with hair. Quote, "It had no hands, the long fingers jutting from the arms like stalks," Stewart wrote. From time to time, cases of this type receive worldwide publicity. A Reuters dispatch from Pretoria, South Africa, examined one such case in April 1968. A widow named Mrs. Anna de la Rovera protested to authorities that her house was haunted. In February 1968, she returned home one evening and found a man dressed in gray sitting on her front porch. When she asked him what he wanted, he simply stood up and walked into the house through the closed front door. The mysterious stranger appeared frequently after that, often invading her bedroom and making amorous advances to her. Quote, "About a month ago, after I had gone to bed one night," she told reporters, "I saw a dark apparition coming out of the kitchen. It was covered with long hair, and I particularly remember its long, curved fingernails. Her children also saw this specter. Mrs. Rivera appealed to the Pretoria City Council for new housing. From the Rainham Echo, 24th March 1970, titled Bus Q Sights a Flying Saucer. Mysterious flying saucer-like objects have been sighted over Upminster and Hornchurch, and police, the Ministry of Defence, and the London Weather Centre can give no definitive explanation for them. 2 Echo reporters saw a mysterious glowing object on Wednesday, and a bus queue of 15 people sighted another disc on Thursday. Mrs. Joan Barry was standing with her neighbor waiting for a bus outside St. Lawrence's Church, Upminster, on Thursday. With them were a dozen or so other people. Quote, "We were waiting for a bus after bingo," said Mrs. Barry, "and we both saw a rainbow-colored disc in the sky over the Hall Lane area. As we watched, we saw it hover for a few seconds, and then it glided away gently. As it glided, it changed color and became bright orange." Said Barry Oliver, "We saw a bright oval-shaped disc hovering, then it shimmered and went into 2 images and disappeared." A spokesman for the Royal Air Force at the Defence Ministry building in London said there was no RAF activity in the area on either of the 2 nights. In Belo Horizonte, Minas Gerais, Brazil, on August 28, 1963, after dinner at about 7:30 p.m., Fernando and Ronaldo Eustachio Gualberto and Jose Marcos Gomez Vidal went out into the garden to wash out a coffee percolator with water from a drum that stood by the well. The moon was out and the garden was brightly illuminated. As Jose Marcos, the 7-year-old from across the street, lowered his head into the tank to scoop up water with a bowl, Ronaldo, 7, and his brother Fernando, 12, noticed that the bright light actually came from a spherical object about 10 feet wide that was hovering just over the pear tree in front of their house. The sphere was divided into squares and had 3 antenna-like rods sticking out from the top. Through its transparent walls, the boys could see 4 beings, all wearing what appeared to be diver suits and clear helmets. They were seated on 1-legged stools. One of the beings appeared to be female, judging from the long, pulled-back blonde hair. The others, all bald, were apparently male. Suddenly, one of the men, who seemed about 10 feet tall, floated down to the ground between 2 parallel shafts of yellow light shining from the underside of the sphere. Through his transparent helmet, which had a hoop-shaped antenna on top and a small round ball hanging from it, the boys could see that the being had only one large, round, all-dark eye. Above this frequently moving eye was a dark, protuberant area that resembled an eyebrow. The being's face had a reddish tint. The rest of his body was covered with a leather-like uniform that seemed wrinkled at the limbs and chest. It was brown on top, white below the waist, and black from the knees down. These were apparently boots. With a measured step, the enormous being headed toward Jose Marcos, who had his head in the water drum. Seeing a threat, Fernando jumped on Jose Marcos and threw him on the ground in an effort to protect him. The being then looked at the boys, who now felt powerless to flee or shout, and began speaking strange words and gesturing with his hands and head. When the being moved to sit down on the edge of the well, Fernando ran behind the entity, picked up a chipped brick, and raised it to throw at him. Suddenly the giant jumped up and a beam of yellow light emerged from the rectangular area at the level of his chest and struck Fernando's hand, causing him to drop the brick. The being, who had a copper-colored box on his back, again began speaking in a loud voice, apparently trying to make himself understood. Finally, the being gave up and floated back into the sphere, which then brightened, rose slightly, and vanished from sight. The boys then ran into the house and reported the encounter to their mother. Jose Marcos crawled under a bed. The father later found small triangular marks about 3 inches deep along the path where the boys said the mysterious being had walked. In Abbiate Guazzone, near Varese, Italy, on April 24, 1950, at 10 o'clock p.m., Bruno Ficini heard and saw sparks which he attributed to a storm, but he soon discovered a dark mass hovering between a pole and a tree 200 yards from his house. A man dressed in tight-fitting clothes and wearing a helmet appeared to be making repairs. There were 3 other figures working around the huge craft. This work being over, a trap through which light had been shining was closed and the thing took off. Other details were as follows. The object made a sound similar to that of a giant beehive, and the air seemed strangely warm around it. 2 of the men were standing on the ground near the ladder, the third one was on a telescopic elevator, the base of which touched the ground and was holding something near a group of pipes. This produced the sparks seen by Ficini. They were about 5 feet 9 inches tall, dressed in gray diving suits with an oval transparent glass in front of their faces, which were concealed behind gray masks. From the fore portion of the masks, a flexible pipe emerged at the level of the mouth. They wore earphones. Inside the craft could be seen a series of oxygen-type containers and many dials. When Ficini offered his help, the men talked among themselves in guttural sounds, and one of them took a camera-like device from around his neck and projected a beam of light on Ficini, who tumbled away for several yards. He was then caught by a rush of air and thrown again to the ground. They subsequently ignored him as they recovered the elevator and brought it inside the craft, which took off. After a sleepless night, Ficini returned to the site and found some metal fragments left by the soldering operation, also 4 circular imprints and patches of scorched grass. He revealed the observation only 10 days later when his doctor treated him for the pains and bruises resulting from his fall and advised him to call police. Ministry of Defense technicians who examined the metal samples found them to consist of an anti-friction material very resistant to heat. The incident had other witnesses who testified privately. On at least 5 occasions in June 1905, always in the daytime, a woman in white was seen flying over Voltana, Spain without wings. It is estimated about 240 people saw this. Sometimes she was flying against the wind, and one woman said she heard singing as the quote-unquote angel passed overhead. 2 Englishmen were among the witnesses, so the sightings cannot be ascribed to a vivid peasant imagination, so to speak. No one could find any evidence of a hoax. An unusual encounter, which took place in May 1913, was not revealed to the world until 1978, by which time the witness was a grandfather. He stuck to his story through intensive questioning, remembering the time he was 12 years old, chopping cotton with his 2 brothers on the family farm near Farmsville, Texas. They heard the dogs howling, and when they went to investigate, found a little green man only 18 inches tall. Quote, "He didn't seem to have on any shoes, but I don't remember his feet. His arms were hanging down just beside him, like they were growed down the side of him. He had on a kind of hat that reminded me of a Mexican hat. It was a little round hat that looked like it was built onto him. He didn't have on any clothes. Everything looked like a rubber suit, including the hat. The dogs jumped on him and tore him to pieces, and he seemed to have human internal organs. Next day when the boys visited the spot where the bloody remains had laid, there was no trace of them." 20 little men were seen near Barron, Wisconsin, on a summer's night in 1919. Harry Anderson was a 13-year-old boy traveling in a car with others when the car ran out of oil. Harry walked to a farm to fetch some, and as he was walking back, he saw 20 little men walking along towards him in a single file. They had bald heads and white skins and wore leather knee pads held up by braces over their shoulders. They were mumbling but not talking to each other, and they paid no attention to the terrified boy. A little ET-like entity has surprised an Australian family when it unexpectedly appeared in their house one night in 1930. This is at Mandurah in Western Australia, and Beryl Hickey, who was a teenager at the time, remembered the event clearly. Quote, "It was the most frightening thing I had ever seen. My father, who was religious, was terrified. He thought it was the work of the devil, and threw a prawning net over it to drag it outside. It had big ears, a wide slit mouth, and glistened as though it was wet or covered in oil. It stood about half a meter tall with bulging eyes covered with a film. It was obviously not human, yet it had perfectly formed little hands and feet, and was pink like a baby. It made a frightened squeaky noise when it was caught under the net. Our father told us never to speak about it or tell anyone." Now some strange events from Quebec, Canada. Lake monsters reported in Lake Alimer, Lake Basketong, Lake Blue Sea, Lake Balcour, Lake Breeches, Lake Brompton, Lac aux Cidre, Lake Champlain, Champ, Lake Creux, Lake Declar, Lizzie, Lake Desert, Lake Mascononge, Lake Massawippi, Lake Megantic, Lake Memphremagog, Mocking Lake, Lake Moffat, Lac de Pile, Lake Pocknock, Lake Remy, Lake Saint Francois, Lake Saint Jean, Lake Simon, Lake Sinclair, Lac Trente et un Mille, Les Trois Lacs, and Lake Williams. In Montreal, fine white filaments floated down onto a ship. It was tough and resilient, difficult to break when stretched, and disappeared after a few minutes. None of these features applying to spiders' webs. Icon from Mount Athos began to stream with myrrh. Began November 1982, continued to at least 4 years. Lake Pohunegamuk, home of lake monster Ponic, up to 80 feet long, 3 humps seen, or an upturned boat shape. In St. Bruno, children on farm saw a cloud from the sky, from which came the Blessed Virgin Mary, who spoke to them about peace and brotherhood, late July 1968. St. Lawrence River, 65 miles north of Quebec City. Airline pilot and co-pilot watched submarine for 4 or 5 minutes in an area where the Navy said a submarine cannot operate, March 1965. UFO of flashing red lights seen by witnesses on Nuns Island to plunge in a river, 23rd May 1969. In St. Stanislas de Kotska, children saw UFOs and an entity, 28th July 1968. On the same day, UFO and several entities seen at Upton. Now from Saskatchewan, near Beachy, ghost light seen in Buffalo Basin District, 1912 to 1925. At Nipawin, 3 witnesses saw landed UFO and watched several little entities in silver suits going up and down a ladder. Square imprints in burnt areas seen and photographed next day, summer 1935. Lake monster reports at Peter Pond and Turtle Lake. In Saskatoon, 4 children saw oval UFO hover, then drop something. They went nearer and saw entity 9 feet tall in white monk's-like suit, who made noises and held out his hands. They fled, 19 September 1963. In Tabor lights seen around cemetery, dating back to 1892 with most activity in November to December 1938. And in the Yukon Territory at Lake Teslin, there were lake monster reports. In the summer of 1952, at 0300 hours, in Itaheim, Brazil, a woman was awakened by a thunderclap and a strong bluish light. As she got out, she saw a large number of hovering disc-shaped machines resembling inverted soup plates 200 meters away at an altitude of about 1 meter. She observed them for 30 minutes, saw two figures standing on one of the craft and looking at the sky. They went back inside, and shortly thereafter the fleet took off, one object at a time. In the summer of 1952, in Martin County, Texas, Mrs. Rogers saw an object descend slowly and pass across a pasture at 7 meters altitude. She stopped her car and observed it was, quote, wobbling in midair, was shaped like a turtle, and showed 3 oar-like protrusions that moved slowly. Estimated dimensions 5 by 4 meters, 1 meter thick. It was greenish-gray in color, emitted a blue flame, but showed no other light. On June 15, 1952, in Magneville, France, men at work in the forest saw large circular objects similar to parachutes coming down. Half a dozen witnesses. On July 11, 1952, in Hasselbach, Germany, Oskar Link, former Wehrmacht major, and his daughter Gabrielle, 11, had to leave their motorcycle when they had a flat tire. Inside the woods, the girl noticed 2 men in silvery suits examining the ground in a clearing near a pink disc-shaped object 8 meters in diameter, showing a double row of openings around the rim and a black turret on top. One of the men had a flashing box. Both men went inside and the disc vibrated, rose along the turret-like cylinder, then spun faster and rose out of sight. On July 20th, 1952, at 0:30 hours, in Dai El Aoudri, Morocco, approximate date, R. Petitjean saw a luminous object, 20 meters in diameter, on the ground. It gave off bluish flames as it took off, leaving a smell of burning sulfur. On July 24th, 1952, at night, in Vico, Italy, a man who was fishing in the Serchio River saw a disc hovering for 10 minutes. From it hung a hose that plunged into the water. The object was 20 meters in diameter, with 5 propellers in the rear and a dome with something like blades on top. An orange glow could be seen through slits along the deck. A man wearing a diving helmet looked at the witness through a window, and he received a kind of electric shock as the green ray hit him. He looked up with difficulty in time to see the object fly away toward the east. 6 days later, a stranger with a foreign accent contacted the witness and intimidated him. On July 29, 1952, in Enid, Oklahoma, Sidney Eubank went to the Enid police station and told Sergeant Vern Bennell that an enormous disc had buzzed his car as he drove between Bison and Waukonis on Highway 81. The rush of air made the car leave the road while the object flew west very fast. On August 19, 1952, in the evening, in West Palm Beach, Florida, Ronnie Desverges saw a large, round, dark object above him in a clearing. It had a turret on top. Red balls of light were emitted by the object and burned him. He also observed a quote-unquote hideous creature aboard the craft. Grass roots were scorched at the site. August 24th, 1952, 0600 hours, in Frontenac, Kansas, a man driving through a wood encountered a strange object and stopped to observe it. It looked like 2 turtle shells glued together, about 25 meters long, with a humanoid creature in what appeared to be a control cabin in front. Windows lighted by an immense blue light, and a throbbing sound were also reported. The object was oscillating and suddenly flew straight up with a strong humming noise. The middle section supported what looked like propellers. The object hovered 3 meters above the ground. In Brighton, England, a 26-year-old man says he came upon 3 humanoid creatures on the beach in East Sussex. The Judokan teacher on Wednesday told Cryptozoology News that he was walking his way home along the seafront pavement in Brighton at 10:30 p.m. when the event purportedly took place. Quote, I stopped to light a cigarette and heard noises towards the sea other than the waves, the man who provided a full name but requested anonymity said about last Saturday's encounter. The sounds were very strange, a kind of wheezing oogie-oogie noise. The eyewitness reports that, concerned about someone choking, he went and took a look over the railing. I then shouted, hello! And that's when I saw 3 small figures stand up from what I guess was a prone position. All 3 stared for a few seconds, then leapt back down and turned and crawled into the sea, he recalls about the incident. The amphibious creatures, he said, were about 3 feet tall and exhibited a wide head with large eyes. I could clearly see it in the dark. They seemed to move in a way which suggested a strange and flexible bone structure. They leapt up onto 2 legs quickly, and just as quickly into a prone, almost frog-like position. In Sarasota, Florida, a newspaper delivery man says he has captured the images and sounds of what he calls an extraterrestrial being operating a hovering device. The anonymous man says he was on his way to deliver the newspaper to a funeral home in an unnamed cemetery in Sarasota, Florida, when he noticed the oddity last Monday night. Quote, this night, I heard a dull whirring noise, and some other metal clanging noises, he wrote, on a report submitted to the Mutual UFO Network. I saw strange lights illuminating a tree in the cemetery on my way in. I thought I saw an object moving and hovering around the cemetery, below the tree line, and among the trees near the intersection, he added. The driver, who claims to regularly videotape moments from his delivery route, captured the entire incident on a 3-minute-long video. The footage shows the man driving back to a specific part of the cemetery, intermittently showing the screens of his GPS device. Suddenly, he parks his vehicle to document the encounter through the window on the right. Quote, "It looks like a bald person sitting on a porch with some kind of a light," he can be heard in the video as he points out a pale humanoid with an oversized head moments prior to driving away. There was a rounded purple light next to it. "I saw with my own eyes how it appeared to be a pale, bald man staring back at me. I zoomed in to record what appeared to be an extraterrestrial," he said later about the captured footage. "The being seemed to be inside of a windowed room, aboard a nearly silent object hovering just feet above the ground." He says he is certain that there are no homes there and that the closest buildings would be at the other side of the cemetery, but he adds the ordeal didn't end there. He maintains that he heard a whispering voice as he drove away, and that the video also shows soft whispers and loud vocalizations. Quote, "When played back with enhanced audio gain, I noticed the presence of EVPs," he says, referring to the electronic voice phenomenon.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
That was a public service announcement designed to scare the shit out.
An introduction to their world, or the first evidence to myself that I'm not completely insane. I was going to give more details on the different kinds of spirits, but it's harder to define types of spirits without attempting to describe their environment, as it's hard to fully define any living creature without its environment being involved in the definition, so I'll eventually give a brief overview of their world. I'm going to use terminology of the Western occult tradition. I believe that a lot of these terms and conceptualizations derive from the Theosophical Rosicrucian traditions, though this business also blurs into or aligns with aspects of many other traditions spread throughout the geography and history of this planet. An absolutely astonishing amount of information they've given me has been completely corroborated in literature associated with those traditions, or perspectives of being. That might not seem very compelling, but these are things which I had no knowledge of before they told me about them. And these same things I then found laid out in often explicit detail in books about mediums from over 100 years ago. That was one of the first things that made me realize that I'm not completely crazy, but at least receiving the same transmission or source of information that these spiritualists and mediums from other eras had recounted in detail. I remember thinking, okay, so there's at least a sort of consensus reality to this stuff. I'm not completely crazy. Little did I know that the reality of this quote-unquote business was about to slam me in the face so hard that I almost never got up, resulting in the worst period of my entire life. But more on that later. Their world, or extra-dimensional space via a psychology programmed by modern Western culture. It's hard to avoid the fact that, in offering a description of the so-called spirit world, I am also essentially telling people just what they may experience after death. A subject which can be a bit personal and important to the individual listener for reasons I'm sure are rather obvious. For that reason, I'm a bit reluctant to share this information for fear of coming across as preachy or even religious. The first thing I will say about their world, however, is that a person's experience in this state of being can be just as individual, personal, and culturally informed as the person is in life. In contrast, though, there are some aspects of this state of being which tend to apply to most post-death individuals. So I'll try to describe some of the basics here. The so-called spirit world is actually many places in states of being, levels of existence, and even other planets in a way. I deal almost entirely with spirits resident in what are generally called the astral planes. These states of being are distributed into levels of what seems to be a metaphorically vertical arrangement with higher and lower levels. These aren't floors in a building connected by stairs, but different versions of the same world. So according to them, the room you're in right now has higher, lower, and even sideways versions of itself in the astral realms. These higher and lower astral realms correspond to religious beliefs in heaven/hell dichotomies. The heights of Olympus and Valhalla compared to the depths of the underworld, Hades, etc. The nauseatingly typical hallmark Christianity image of heaven in the clouds above and hell in the depths below almost seems like a cosmic satire of these states of being. Having said that, though, there are astral places which have no physical world parallel, and places in our world which are solid rock can be a sprawling kingdom for them. I have a theory that this is the source of folklore involving subterranean fairy worlds and rather far-flung notions about a physically hollow earth. Perhaps even quote-unquote underground UFO bases. The spirits and the levels I am generally aligned with, much more to explain on that later, come across as idealized people, and all my human contacts have bodies around or under 30 years of age. They tell me, however, that spirits in lower levels of the astral planes can be aged, diseased, deformed, and generally physically horrid. Spirits can travel among levels and other worlds via portal-type openings and other means. There is another condition of being called the etheric, which seems to exist in a state between the astral planes and the physical world as we understand it. Alright, the etheric plane. The etheric plane is a term I'll use for that realm between the astral and the physical, as that is the word used most commonly in the Western perspective from what I've read. It is the state of being often associated with, quote, near-death experiences, and some of the phenomenon associated with the silly and spooky terms ghost and haunting. It is a state which is very closely tied to the physical. It is what you experience after, and even during to a degree, physical death, and before you, quote, enter the light, pass through the doorway, zoom to another planet, or whatever the specific case may be, as this process is experienced differently by different people while always representing a transition of sorts. My spirit contacts tell me that a post-death human can affect people and material on the physical level only while they are on the etheric level of being. Astral human spirits can only usually interact with physical humans who are quote-unquote sensitives, like me, while etheric humans can do all sorts of spook tricks towards living humans like apparitions, poltergeist business, and such. Humans stick around in this state of being often because they are confused about their new state of existence, or are unwilling to part with something which is very important to them in the physical, be it a person, riches, a grudge, or an object, which echoes the denunciations of material objects and riches found in many spiritual philosophies. If someone has very strong materialistic beliefs about reality, and they firmly believe that they will cease to exist when they die, then they will have a very difficult time after death. They will be extremely confused and will refuse to acknowledge the fact that they have died. It's like slipping someone a strong dose of LSD when they believe that such a drug is just a placebo and will have no effect on them whatsoever. They freak the hell out and can often go quote-unquote insane. So, strict materialism is extremely harmful, not just dismal and boring. Apparitions of the dead that people see in graveyards and other depositories of the departed are often the dead, decaying, and discarded etheric remains of a person who has moved on to the astral. There are even beings who exist in the etheric which devour these remains just like bacteria and other organisms break down dead bodies in the physical world. The etheric form of a person is closely tied to the physical body, so if that physical body is instantly and comprehensively obliterated, then the person jumps straight into the astral, skipping the etheric entirely, always causing a shock and often negatively affecting their spiritual life. I know this all sounds like ghost story cliche, but this is what they've told me, so I'm relaying it here as nearly embarrassing as it could be. Or might sound to some. Though, hey, Tales of the Kraken preceded the discovery of the giant squid, and Mickey Mouse's fictional state doesn't disprove the existence of mice, so who knows?
He was abducted by aliens earlier this afternoon. That little girl got lost under the bed. She went into an alternate dimension.
This article is called Do Parallel Worlds Interact with One Another? It was posted to engineering.com on October 31st, 2014, and is cited to have been published by Griffith University. Griffith University academics are challenging the foundations of quantum science with a radical new theory based on the existence of interactions between the parallel universes. In a paper published in the prestigious journal Physical Review 10, Professor Howard Wiseman and Dr. Michael Hall from Griffith's Center for Quantum Dynamics and Dr. Dirk Andre Deckert from the University of California take interacting parallel worlds out of the realm of science fiction and into that of hard science. The team proposes that parallel universes really exist and that they interact. That is, rather than evolving independently, nearby worlds influence one another by a subtle force of repulsion. They show that such an interaction could explain everything that is bizarre about quantum mechanics. Quantum theory is needed to explain how the universe works at the microscopic scale and is believed to apply to all matter. But it is notoriously difficult to fathom, exhibiting weird phenomena which seem to violate the laws of cause and effect. As the eminent American theoretical physicist Richard Feynman once noted, I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics. However, the many interacting worlds approach developed at Griffith University provides a new and daring perspective on this baffling field. Quote, the idea of parallel universes in quantum mechanics has been around since 1957, says Professor Wiseman. In the well-known many worlds interpretation, each universe branches into a bunch of new universes every time a quantum measurement is made. All the possibilities are therefore realized. In some universes, the dinosaur-killing asteroid missed Earth. In others, Australia was colonized by the Portuguese. But critics question the reality of these other universes since they do not influence our universe at all. On this score, our many interacting worlds approach is completely different, as its name implies. Professor Wiseman and his colleagues propose that the universe we experience is just one of a gigantic number of worlds. Some are almost identical to ours, while most are very different. All of these worlds are equally real, exist continuously throughout time, and possess precisely defined properties. All quantum phenomena arise from a universal force of repulsion between nearby, or other words, similar worlds, which tends to make them more dissimilar. Dr. Hall says the many interacting worlds theory may even create the extraordinary possibility of testing for the existence of other worlds. Quote, the beauty of our approach is that if there is just one world, our theory reduces to Newtonian mechanics, while if there is a gigantic number of worlds, it reproduces quantum mechanics, he says. In between, it predicts something new that is neither Newton's theory nor quantum theory. We also believe that, in providing a new mental picture of quantum effects, it will be useful in planning experiments to test and exploit quantum phenomena. The ability to approximate quantum evolution using a finite number of worlds could have significant ramifications in molecular dynamics, which is important for understanding chemical reactions and the actions of drugs. Professor Bill Poirier, distinguished professor of chemistry at Texas Tech University, has observed, quote, "These are great ideas, not only conceptually, but also with regard to the new numerical breakthroughs they are almost certain to engender." As an aside, I just want to note that the many worlds theory is a part of my personal theory on how occult magic actually works.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
This article is called "Mexico Crop Circles Appear Overnight on Christmas Eve Following Local Reports of Bright Lights." It was posted to Inquisitor.com on December 27, 2014 by Sean Mahoney. Some barley fields in Mexico's Texcoco region were garnered with strange sprawling crop circle designs overnight Christmas Eve. Crop circles have been appearing around the world for decades, many believing the often very intricate and massive designs to be messages from some otherworldly entity. Skeptics, meanwhile, have long called crop circles man-made poppycock. Regardless, the fresh new crop circles in Mexico have sparked the curiosity of many, with hundreds of people in the media turning out in droves to witness the mysterious, and possibly alien, crop circle designs. The mystery of the 7-hectare crop circle pattern that appeared in the Texcoco, Mexico barley fields on Christmas Eve remains unsolved, reports RT, along with several Mexican media outlets. The Christmas Eve skies in the area of Mexico where the crop circles appeared were reportedly cloudy and rainy, but many locals in the Texcoco region, located about 25 kilometers from Mexico City, reported seeing bright lights in those skies overnight. Like gifts left by Santa Claus, the local residents found the crop circles in the morning, which, coupled with the strange lights, left many in wonder at the bizarre crop circle patterns in their local barley field. One of those reporting the strange lights of Mexico and more was an anonymous local woman who told police she was witnessing, quote, "the presence of aliens in farming areas and various figures in the crops," end quote, according to El Universal newspaper. Mexico's federal and municipal police responded to the crop circle fields in question, and while they have yet to establish who or what created the crop circles, they have set up a perimeter to guard the fields. Police were joined by a crowd of at least 2,000 people. Among the curious spectators were several scientists examining the crop circles and surrounding area, while also gathering photographic evidence from the Mexico crop circle scene. At the same time, examination of these new Mexico crop circles revealed that they weren't quite as intricate or extraordinary as other crop circles that have popped up around the world. In fact, the more onlookers examined the crop circles, the more they began to speculate that if extraterrestrial beings were, in fact, responsible for these Mexico crop circles, they'd perhaps been making merry on Christmas Eve and gotten too jolly while creating their crop circle messages. Also, a video posted on a YouTube crop circles channel shows these Texcoco, Mexico crop circles to be far less sophisticated than hundreds of other examples of the crop circle phenomenon.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
I want to read the definition of remote viewing from the website remoteview.com. What is remote viewing? A January 1979 secret progress report from SRI, Stanford Research Institute, to the DIA describes remote viewing as, quote, "Remote viewing is the acquisition and description by mental means of information blocked from ordinary perception by distance or shielding and generally believed to be secure against such access," end quote. It's from the SRI Quarterly Progress Report for the DIA, January 10, 1979. Remote viewing is a psychic or intuitive skill originally developed and utilized as an operational intelligence gathering tool for the United States military and intelligence services. From the years 1972 to 1995, remote viewing was studied and developed under scientific conditions at SRI and eventually formed into a trainable skill that was transferred to the U.S. military to be used in operational data gathering or spying. Remote viewing is the mental ability whereby a person, known as a remote viewer, can describe very subtle impressions of a target location, object, event, life form, structure, or pretty much anything you can think of, using what is more commonly known as psychic phenomena or intuition. What makes remote viewing different from the traditional psychic techniques is that it is done within a set of scientific protocols or rules. Remote viewing is more commonly practiced within a developed methodology of very structured stages that help the viewer slowly build the incoming impressions whilst minimizing the signal to noise. Most remote viewing methods commonly follow the original method developed by the primary creator of remote viewing, Ingo Swann, called controlled remote viewing, or CRV. Today, now that remote viewing is fully established in the public domain, there are many differing offshoots of the Swann CRV methodology, and many different businesses offering RV services across the globe. What remote viewing is not. Remote viewing is not used to give psychic readings, tell fortunes, or other sorts of popular traditional psychic activities of this nature, but is rather a means of doing serious scientific research and for performing operational data gathering in criminal investigations, government intelligence work, commercial applications, and in many other avenues whereby intelligence is hard to come by. Remote viewing is never spontaneous, and it's never done face-to-face with clients. All data is fully recorded, and all projects are practiced in blind conditions to try to prove that the recorded data could only have come by intuition and not by any other form of communication. What started as a top-secret $20 million and 23-year U.S. military intelligence program, more commonly known under its umbrella name of the Stargate program, to combat the Cold War Russian psychic spies, has now grown into a worldwide civilian community with the original military DIA, CIA remote viewers now teaching this subtle art, and their students expanding out in the world and setting up their own private companies and using this skill in many new and exciting ways.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
This article is called Bigfoot and the Rainbow Body. It was posted on December 29th, 2017 by Joshua Scott Hodgkin to his website, dungherder.wordpress.com. Stories of a Bigfoot-like creature transcend cultures and continents over millennia. But is it pure myth, an actual animal, or traces of transcended beings? I've spent the past few decades fascinated by Fortean phenomena, the paranormal, supernatural, and anomalistic. This is not because I'm a believer in the literal existence of these phenomena, just as I am not a believer in the literal existence of any kind of phenomena. However, these experiences do say much about the shifting sands of perception and offer glimpses into a reality beyond that ascribed by naive realists. Bigfoot has never been one of my favorite topics in this area. In fact, among Forteans, I am a bit of an obscurantist. Cryptozoology, ufology, and hauntings have not been interesting to me since I really dived into hardcore anomalies. However, as a younger man, I did find those subjects more fascinating and held a weak belief in them and spent time trying to find evidence of my own. My failure to do so is probably just as responsible for my Fortean obscurantism as my normal day-to-day contrarianism. As a philosophical idealist, I tend to study all kinds of things that are experienced even though they allegedly are not supposed to be. Recently, I started looking to a concept I had not read about in a few years called the rainbow body. It is a Buddhist concept which describes the abnormal exit from existence supposedly achieved by several advanced practitioners over the last 2,000 years. In the Dzogchen teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, the rainbow body may occur in three ways, depending on the level of transcendence achieved. Here are descriptions of the three levels from the Rigpa Wiki. Rainbow body. Fully accomplished Dzogchen practitioners can dissolve their body at the time of death. 1. Through the practice of Chukcho, the practitioner can attain the so-called rainbow body, in which the body becomes smaller and smaller as it dissolves, emanating into rainbow light, and finally only the hair and nails are left behind. 2. Through the practice of Doggal, the practitioner can dissolve his or her body into the light body, where the body transforms into light and disappears completely into space. 3. Another accomplishment of Togjal practice is the rainbow body of great transference, where the master dissolves his or her body into rainbow light and lives for centuries in order to benefit others. It is claimed that there have been hundreds to hundreds of thousands of examples of this phenomena throughout history, continuing into recent times where photographic evidence is alleged to support the occurrences. Before moving on, I want to be very clear that I am purely speculating in regards to both Bigfoot and the rainbow body. I have no absolute belief or disbelief in either. There are too many interesting questions to carry that kind of answer baggage around. If the rainbow body phenomenon were inscrutably demonstrated to be true or real, it would make a home run case for philosophical idealism. For many, it already has been demonstrated, but here in the West, far away from the phenomena, we only have accounts of believers and some inconclusive evidence to go by. But what if it were true? Would the phenomena be limited to relatively modern human beings? The cryptozoological notion that Bigfoot is some kind of highly reclusive biped hiding out in the world's forests is not satisfying to me for one obvious reason: the lack of Bigfoot corpses, fossils, mummies, etc. If these animals existed as primal flesh and blood creatures, there would have been some evidence of it by now. We have scratched much of the Earth's surface, but no Bigfoot bones have ever been scattered in the mounds with the thousands of other things we have turned up, many of them far easier to miss than a giant forest-dwelling biped's bones. Last night, in a flash of insight, I put the two ideas together: Bigfoot and the rainbow body. What I find fascinating in that combo is not the idea taken literally, but what it suggests about a few things. Namely, what are the requirements of transcendence, and why should transcendence be exclusive to humans, and are transcendence and intelligence actually compatible? A Dzogchen master who attains the rainbow body would likely have been thought of among his peers as a very wise man. Even those of us who live within the sphere of Western influence, yet disbelieve in the rainbow body, might give credence to the wisdom of one so dedicated to their spiritual path. But by almost any other standard of Western values, they would not display intelligence in the ways which we value it, which tend to be analytical and often cynical. They would not have a great body of dedicated career knowledge or a grasp of historical and modern arts and literature from across the world. They would simply appear as simple mountain men who are peaceful, kind, and humble, while containing a depth of spiritual wisdom which we generally scoff at, even while applauding. On my own path to internal actualization of philosophical idealism, I have come to understand that what we generally value as knowledge are actually just abstractions which obscure our own inner selves. What I had spent my life agreeing with my culture about what intelligence is turned out just to be a very useful set of illusions. These illusions are world-building tools in the process of an interactive always becoming reality. However, they are, in and of themselves, not true or real in the literal way those terms are usually meant. All experiences are equally true, false, real, and unreal. In the consensus reality illusion, a great deal of obfuscation goes into trying to draw those lines with more certainty and absolutism. So then, if the ability for humans in Tibet to transcend the confines of the flesh illusion requires them to ignore the prescribed intellect of Western values and simplify their minds to focus on self-reflection, resulting in transcendence from their physical selves, why couldn't an animal do it or have done it far back in the past? Our human exceptionalism runs deep. Because we have been a rather useful tool for the evolution of technology, we believe ourselves to be incredibly advanced. That may or may not be true. And if it is true, it may not especially be in our best interest. If our goal were to be happy, we might even find that our intelligence has been a sheer burden, whose ultimate products may allow us to eventually surrender. May even a primal being like Bigfoot, noted for its occasional violence and terrorism, could transcend a merely fleshy presence if it was able to reflect upon and fully realize its own inner self? Indeed, there is hope for the rest of us yet.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
This article is called The Evidence for Non-Local Consciousness. Researchers prove consciousness can exist outside of the body and after death. It's posted to consciouslifestylemag.com by Stanislav Grof, MD, PhD. Some observations from the study of holotropic states, non-ordinary or altered states of consciousness, are so radical that they not only challenge the theory and practice of psychiatry, psychology, and psychotherapy, but also undermine some of the most fundamental metaphysical assumptions of Western science. None of these conceptual challenges are more drastic and far-reaching than the new insights regarding the nature of non-local consciousness and its relationship to matter. According to Western neuroscience, consciousness is an epiphenomenon of matter, a byproduct of the complex neurophysiological processes in the brain, and thus an intrinsic and inseparable part of the body. Modern consciousness research conducted in the last 5 decades has made this hypothesis highly questionable. Very few people, including most scientists, realize that we have absolutely no proof that consciousness is actually produced in the brain and by the brain. There is no doubt that there exists vast clinical and experimental evidence showing significant interconnections and correlations between the anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry of the brain on one hand, and states of consciousness on the other. However, it represents a major logical jump to infer from the available data that these correlations represent a proof that the brain is actually the source of consciousness. And, in fact, the data largely points to the fact that consciousness is non-local. Such a deduction would be tantamount to the conclusion that the TV program is generated in the TV set because there is a close correlation between functioning or malfunctioning of its components and the quality of the sound and picture. It should be obvious from this example that the close connection between cerebral activity and consciousness does not exclude the possibility that the brain mediates consciousness but does not actually generate it. The research of holotropic states has amassed ample evidence for this alternative, that consciousness is non-local to the body. There exist no scientific theories explaining how consciousness is generated by material processes, nor does anybody have even a remote idea how something like that could possibly happen. The gap between consciousness and matter is so formidable that it is impossible to imagine how it could be bridged. In spite of the lack of convincing evidence that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the brain or matter, this basic metaphysical assumption remains one of the leading myths of Western materialistic science. While there exists no scientific proof for the fact that the brain generates consciousness, there are numerous observations indicating that consciousness can, under certain circumstances, function independently of the brain and of the world of matter. This philosophy is referred to as non-local consciousness. In holotropic states, non-ordinary or altered states of consciousness, our consciousness can reach far beyond the boundaries of the body, ego, and obtain accurate information about various aspects of the material world that we have not obtained in this lifetime through the mediation of our sensory organs, which would not be possible unless consciousness is non-local in nature. We have already mentioned reliving of birth, of prenatal memories, and of conception. In transpersonal experiences, our non-local consciousness can identify with other people, with members of various species of the animal kingdom, from primates to unicellular organisms, with plant life, and even with inorganic materials and processes. We can also transcend linear time and experience vivid ancestral, racial, karmic, and phylogenetic sequences, and episodes from the collective unconscious. Transpersonal experiences can provide not only accurate new information about various aspects of the material world, including those that we are unfamiliar with, but also about various figures and realms of the archetypal domain of the collective unconscious. We can witness or even participate in mythological sequences from any culture of the world in any historical period accurately portrayed in every detail. It is absurd to attribute this rich array of experiences accurately portraying various present and past aspects of the material world and figures, realms, and themes from world mythology to some yet unknown pathology afflicting the brain, whereas we believe that is in fact a byproduct of the abilities we have as a result of the inherent properties of non-local consciousness. The most convincing evidence that consciousness is not produced by the brain and can function independently of it comes from the young scientific discipline of thanatology, the study of death and dying. It is now an established fact, confirmed by many independent observations, that disembodied non-local consciousness of people in near-death situations is able to accurately observe the environment in various near or remote locations and events. Individuals who are clinically dead, in a state of cardiac death and even brain death, are able to observe their bodies and the rescue procedures from above and travel freely to other parts of the same building or various remote places. Independent research has repeatedly confirmed the accuracy of observations made by disembodied non-local consciousness. It refers to Ring and Valerino, 1998, and Sabam, 1982 and 1998. Such non-local consciousness experiences are strikingly reminiscent of the descriptions of the Bardo body found in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Bardo Thodol. This famous spiritual text states that, after having fainted from fear in the Chanyad Bardo, the dying person awakens in the Sidpa Bardo in a new form, the Bardo body. This body differs from the gross body of everyday life. It is not composed of matter and has many remarkable qualities such as the power of unimpeded motion, the ability to penetrate through solid objects, and the capacity to perceive the world without the mediation of the senses. Those who exist in the form of the Bardo body can travel instantaneously to any place on Earth and even to the sacred cosmic mountain, Mount Meru. Only two places are not accessible in this form, the maternal womb and Bodh Gaya, clear references to leaving the Bardo state at the time of conception or enlightenment. Referencing Evans Once, 1957. An extensive study conducted by Ken Ring and his colleagues has added a fascinating dimension to these observations. People who are congenitally blind for organic reasons and have never been able to see anything in their entire lives can perceive the environment when their non-local consciousness detaches from their bodies during various life-threatening situations. The veracity of many of these visions has been confirmed by consensual validation. Ring refers to such visions as veridical OBEs, out-of-body experiences. Ring and Valerino, Ring and Cooper. Various aspects of the environment, accurately perceived by disembodied non-local consciousness of blind subjects, ranged from details of electrical fixtures on the ceiling of the operating room to the surroundings of the hospital observed from a bird's-eye view. Modern thanatological research has thus confirmed an important aspect of classical descriptions of OBEs, which can be found in spiritual literature and philosophical texts. Veridical OBEs are not limited to near-death situations. We have seen them repeatedly in people undergoing psycho-spiritual crisis, spiritual emergencies, and in participants in holotropic breathwork workshops. Some of these individuals were able to observe the group from above and describe unusual behavior of some of its members in spite of the fact that they themselves breathed with their eyes closed. The non-local consciousness of others left the building and observed the environment from above or traveled to some remote locations and observed the events there. On occasion, these bird's-eye views appeared in the mandalas. These observations demonstrate without any reasonable doubt that consciousness is not a product of the brain and thus an epiphenomenon of matter. Consciousness is non-local. It is more likely at least an equal partner of matter or possibly superordinated to it. The matrices for many of the aforementioned experiences clearly are not contained in the brain, but are stored in some kind of immaterial field or in the field of non-local consciousness itself. The most promising developments in hard science offering models for transpersonal experience are David Bohm's idea of the implicate order, Bohm 1980, Rupert Sheldrake's concept of morphogenetic fields, Sheldrake 1981-1988, and Irvin Laszlo's hypothesis of the psi field or akashic field, Laszlo 1993 and 2004.
Science can explain everything if we look hard enough.
Shut up, science bitch.
Nothing is true. Everything is real.
Not only is he like ruining my life, but with all this God shit that he's into, he could be ruining my afterlife.
It's a sort of interdimensional vagina that somehow appears. I can interact with it.
Fabric of the entire universe could be torn apart.
I know my mind is changing. I'm already too far gone to know